The bell above the diamond store door chimed softly, a delicate sound that usually signaled the arrival of wealth. Joon-sok Park stepped inside, his polished Oxfords silent on the marble floor. He was here for a transaction, a 15-carat insurance policy for a marriage he didn't want. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored black suit, his mind already drifting toward a shipment of contraband stuck in Incheon, until his gaze shifted to the woman behind the counter. Joon-sok froze. The air in his lungs turned to lead. Under the harsh white glow of a $1 million chandelier stood a ghost he had buried years ago. But this wasn't the woman he remembered. The Amara he knew had been a soft creature, a woman whose spirit he had meticulously dismantled with legal filings and cold silences. He had left her in a rain-slicked parking lot with a single suitcase and a bank account frozen to zero. He had expected her to wither. He had expected her to break. Instead, Amara Cole stood before him like a monument to everything he couldn't control. She was dressed in a cream luxury suit dress that draped perfectly over her poised frame. Her hair was styled in a sharp, sophisticated bob, and diamond studs caught the light at her ears. Real diamonds, far better than anything he had ever gifted her. There was no tremor in her hands as she polished a velvet display tray. She looked up. Her dark, intelligent eyes met his, and for the first time in his life, Joon-sok felt the crushing weight of a power shift. He expected a scream, a flinch, or the panicked look of a victim cornered by her predator. She gave him none of it. Amara offered a professional, hollow smile, the kind one gives a stranger who has walked in off the street. "Welcome to Cole & Company," she said, her voice a melodic, steady silk that cut deeper than any blade. "I assume you're looking for something to signify a commitment? Or perhaps you're just here to see what a self-made empire looks like." Joon-sok took a step forward, his tattoos itching beneath his collar, a physical manifestation of the violence he usually used to solve problems. But his intimidation died in the space between them. He looked at her hands. No wedding ring, just a heavy gold band on her index finger. She looked expensive. She looked untouchable. "Amara," he rasped, the name tasting like ash. "That's Ms. Cole to you, Joon-sok," she replied, her gaze never wavering. "Now, shall we look at the stones? I should warn you, my inventory is far more resilient than I was when you met me. You'll find these much harder to crush." The memory hit Joon-sok with the force of a physical blow, blurring the glittering showroom into a gray, rain-streaked afternoon 5 years prior. The air in his father's legal firm had smelled of old parchment and expensive tobacco. Joon-sok sat at the head of a mahogany table, his face a mask of calculated indifference. Before him lay the divorce decree, not a settlement, but an execution. With a steady hand, he unsheathed his fountain pen. Each stroke of his signature was a tactical strike, systematically erasing Amara's access to their shared accounts, the penthouse, and even the protection of the park name. To the Mafia heir, this wasn't personal. It was a cleanup operation. His father had made it clear. A woman like Amara, a woman without lineage or blood-soaked hands, was a liability to their ascension. To lead the Syndicate, Joon-sok had to be a vacuum of emotion. Outside the heavy oak doors, the sound of muffled sobbing drifted through the vents. It wasn't a loud, dramatic wail, but a low, desperate sound that grated against his nerves. He knew she was there, huddled in the hallway of the firm where he had forbidden her from entering the room. She had arrived that morning thinking they were going to talk about fixing things. Instead, she had been met by a phalanx of 3 lawyers who informed her she had exactly 20 minutes to vacate the property. Jun's sock capped his pen with a sharp click. "It's done," he told the lead attorney, his voice devoid of warmth. As he stepped out into the hallway, he didn't stop. He didn't look down. He caught a glimpse of her in his periphery, Amara, sitting on a bench, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She looked small, swallowed by the cold architecture of his world. She had reached out, her fingers just grazing the wool of his sleeve, a silent plea for a mercy he had already decided not to grant. "Jun's sock, please," she had whispered, her voice fractured. "I have nothing. Where am I supposed to go?" "Away," he had replied, never breaking his stride toward the elevator. He had walked away believing he had destroyed her for her own good, that by leaving her with nothing, he was freeing her from the crosshairs of his enemies. He had convinced himself that she was a fragile flower he had uprooted to save from the frost. Now, standing in her boutique, Junsook looked at the woman who had not only survived that frost, but had learned to bloom in the dark. The memory of her tears felt like a lie compared to the iron-willed woman currently waiting for him to speak. The silence in the boutique was heavy, thick with the ghosts of the hallway where he had once abandoned her. Junsook shook off the memory, his predatory instincts rising to the surface. He couldn't reconcile the weeping woman from his past with the poised executive before him, so he fell back on the only weapon he knew, his wealth. "A beautiful speech, Amara," he said, his voice regaining its low, gravelly authority. He stepped closer to the glass display, his shadow falling over a velvet bust. "But we both know how the world works. Everyone has a price, and everything is for sale. I'm here for the best you have." He gestured vaguely at the shimmering cases, his luxury watch catching the light, a subtle reminder of the world he still ruled. "The Blue Heart. I heard you acquired it at the Geneva auction last month. I'll take it. Double your asking price, paid in full, untraceable." It was a flex, a blunt force attempt to re-establish the hierarchy. He wanted to see her scramble, to see the professional mask slip in the face of a commission that could fund a small country. He wanted her to remember that he was the sun, and she was merely a planet orbiting his gravity. Amara didn't blink. She didn't even look at the vault. Instead, she leaned back slightly, crossing her arms with an effortless grace that made his heart hammer against his ribs in a way no gunfight ever had. "The Blue Heart is a masterpiece of pressure and time," she said softly. "It doesn't belong on the hand of a woman who is being bought for a political alliance. And it certainly doesn't belong to a man who thinks money can wash the blood off his hands." Junsook's jaw tightened. "I'm not here for a lecture. I'm here to do business." "Then you've walked into the wrong store," Amara replied. She stood up straighter, her presence expanding until she seemed to tower over the man who had once discarded her. "I don't need your money, Junsook. My books are balanced, my investors are loyal, and my reputation is spotless. Your untraceable funds are a liability I can't afford. In fact, your very presence is lowering the property value." She reached beneath the counter and pressed a silent button. A moment later, the heavy electromagnetic locks on the front door clicked open. "I'm refusing your business," she said, her voice devoid of anger, which hurt far worse. "You left me with nothing because you thought I was nothing. Now, you can leave with your millions, and you'll find that they still can't buy you a single second of my time. Get out." Junsook stood paralyzed, the most powerful man in the underworld rendered invisible by a woman who had once begged for his mercy. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind Junsook, but the silence of the street offered no reprieve. He sat in the back of his armored sedan, his hands clenched so tightly on his knees that his knuckles turned white, tracing the ink that spiraled up his wrists. He should have been calculating the logistics of the Incheon shipment, or memorizing the dossiers of the rival clans attending his engagement gala. Instead, all he could see was the steady, unimpressed curve of Amara's lips. "Sir, the elder is waiting at the estate," his driver murmured, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "The Choi family has already arrived with the marriage contracts." Jun-suk didn't respond. He was staring at a smudge on the window, his mind replaying the way Amara had looked at him, not with hatred, which he could have exploited, but with a terrifying, absolute indifference. When he arrived at the Park family estate, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of lilies and cigar smoke. Min-ah Choi, his fiancée, and the daughter of his most powerful political ally, stood in the center of the drawing room. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper ambitions, her beauty as cold as a mountain spring. She looked at him as he entered, her eyes narrowing as they flicked to his empty hands. "You went to the boutique for the blue heart," Min-ah said, her voice a polished blade. She stepped toward him, sniffing the air as if she could catch a scent of his distraction. "The store called my father's office. They said you left empty-handed. More importantly, they said you were seen arguing with the owner." "It was a business disagreement," Jun-suk replied, his voice a low growl. Min-ah stepped into his personal space, her hand resting on his lapel. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Jun-suk. And I don't like ghosts. They're messy. They have a habit of haunting things that are supposed to be dead." She leaned closer, her whisper venomous. "Fix your face. My father is starting to wonder if his investment is as stable as he thought." The tension escalated an hour later in the soundproofed library. The three elders of the Park Syndicate sat like stone carvings behind a desk of black obsidian. "The alliance with the Choi family is the bedrock of our next decade," the eldest, a man with a scarred throat, wheezed. "We are hearing whispers of a distraction. A woman from your past. A woman we thought you had handled years ago." "I did handle it," Jun-suk snapped, the tattoos on his neck darkening as his blood pressure rose. "Then prove it," the elder countered, slamming a hand on the desk. "The board demands total focus. If this woman is a loose end, snip it. If she is a memory, burn it. But if you let her shadow fall over this wedding, we will find someone more disciplined to take your seat. Do you understand?" Jun-suk nodded, the motion stiff and robotic. He was the boss, the predator, the man who left his enemies with nothing. But as he looked at the wedding contract on the table, it felt less like a crown and more like a shroud. The blue light of the computer monitors reflected off the obsidian desk in Jun-suk's private study, casting his sharp features into deep shadow. Across from him sat Kang, a man who specialized in finding things that were meant to stay buried. Kang didn't speak. He simply slid a thin, unmarked folder across the desk. "I want to know who backed her," Jun-suk said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. "Which rival family? Which European conglomerate laundered the seed money? No one goes from a suitcase and a bus ticket to owning a block of prime real estate in the Diamond District without a ghost in their corner." He opened the folder, expecting to see a web of connections, a wealthy lover, a strategic marriage of her own, or perhaps a predatory loan from a competitor looking to spite the Park family. He was prepared to find a target, a man he could break to prove that her success was just another shadow cast by someone else's power. Kang cleared his throat, a sound of uncharacteristic hesitation. "That's the thing, sir. There is no ghost." Jun-suk paused, his thumb hovering over a photograph of Amara, standing in front of a modest industrial workshop in Antwerp. "Keep looking." "We did," Kang insisted. "We tracked every cent. After the divorce, she sold the one thing your lawyers couldn't touch, the vintage watch her father left her. She used the money to move to Belgium. She worked 16-hour shifts at a diamond cutting factory. She wasn't just staff, sir. She was an apprentice. Apparently, she has a surgical eye for flaws that even the machines miss. June Suk flicked through the pages. Patents for new cutting techniques. A scholarship she won under a pseudonym. A series of small, high-risk loans she paid back 3 months early. There were no offshore accounts, no secret benefactors, just a grueling 5-year timeline of grit and calculated genius. She had built her empire brick by bitter brick, using the very isolation he had imposed on her as a foundation. She did this alone? June Suk whispered, the words feeling like glass in his throat. Completely, Kang confirmed. In fact, she turned down 3 major acquisition offers from the Choi family, your future in-laws, 2 years ago. She told them her brand wasn't for sale to people who play with plastic power. June Suk closed the folder. The silence that followed was suffocating. He had spent years telling himself that he had saved her from the Mafia life by casting her out, assuming she would find a quiet, mediocre existence. He had wanted her to be safe, but he had also wanted her to remain small. Seeing the truth was a different kind of violence. She hadn't just survived the nothingness he left her with, she had used it to build a world where he was irrelevant. He realized then that he hadn't protected her at all. He had simply been the first obstacle she had to overcome. The grand ballroom was a sea of shimmering silk and whispered conspiracies. But for June Suk, the room was empty until he saw her. Amara stood at the center of a circle of diplomats and tech moguls, draped in a gown of liquid midnight that made her skin glow like burnished bronze. She wasn't just a guest. She was the gravitational pull of the evening. June Suk moved through the crowd, a predator in a tuxedo, his presence causing the air to chill as people stepped out of his path. Min-ah, his fiancée, was occupied with a group of socialites, her sharp eyes tracking him from across the room. But he didn't care. He caught Amara near the balcony, where the city lights stretched out like a carpet of fallen stars. "This is a dangerous place for you, Amara," he said, his voice dropping into that low, warning register that usually made men tremble. He stepped into her personal space, his shadow looming over her. "The people in this room, they aren't like the jewelers you deal with. They have teeth. My world doesn't forget a face, and right now, mine is looking at you too closely." Amara took a slow sip of her champagne, her gaze unfazed as she looked him up and down. She didn't retreat. If anything, she stepped closer, until the scent of her perfume, sandalwood and something fiercely clean, invaded his senses. "Your world?" she asked, her voice light, almost conversational. Then, she did something that shattered his remaining composure. She laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh, or a forced one. It was a genuine, melodic sound of amusement that made the tattoos on his chest feel like they were constricting. "June Suk, you still think you're the monster under the bed," she said, leaning in to whisper against his ear, her breath warm. "But you've spent so long in your dark little kingdom that you've forgotten how the sun works. These people? Half of them owe my firm for the collateral on their offshore holdings. The other half are waiting for me to greenlight their next merger." She stepped back, her eyes dancing with a terrifying clarity. "You want to warn me about the sharks? I own the water, June Suk. You're the one still clinging to a sinking ship of blood and honor, while the rest of the world has moved on to something much more powerful: legitimacy." She patted his cheek, a gesture so condescending it felt like a slap. "Go back to your wedding, little king. Your crown is starting to rust." As she walked away, leaving him frozen in the moonlight, Jun-suk realized for the first time that the danger wasn't to her. It was to him. Because he didn't want to crush her anymore. He wanted to follow her. The pen felt like 1,000 pounds in Jun-suk's hand. He was sitting in a private suite at the Park Hyatt, surrounded by the high-ranking council members and the Choi family's legal team. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, the same flowers that would soon adorn a wedding chapel to seal a multi-billion-dollar alliance. This was the final sign-off for the premarital asset merger, a contract that would make him the most powerful man in the underworld. His phone vibrated on the table, a silent notification from a private investigator. She's at the gallery on 5th, alone. Jun-suk stared at the signature line. If he signed this, he was bound to Minna and the Syndicate's rigid, blood-stained hierarchy forever. He would be safe, he would be wealthy, and he would be dead inside. Amara's laughter from the gala echoed in his mind, a taunt that reminded him he was a king of a graveyard. Jun-suk? We are waiting, Minna's father prompted, his voice like grinding stones. Jun-suk looked at the contract. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he laid the pen down. There's a discrepancy in the 3rd clause, he lied, his voice cold and steady. I won't sign until my personal auditors re-examine the Choi Logistics holdings. The meeting is adjourned. The room erupted. Minna stood up, her face twisting into a mask of cold fury. Logistics? We've cleared those for months. You're stalling, Jun-suk, and we both know why. He didn't answer. He walked out of the suite, ignoring the frantic calls from his lieutenants. By walking out, he wasn't just delaying a wedding. He was breaching a blood pact. Within minutes, the fallout began. His encrypted tablet began to glow with urgent alerts. A shipment in Busan had been seized because the Choi family withdrew their customs clearance. 2 of his street bosses had stopped answering their phones. The leak had started, a systematic draining of his power as the Syndicate sensed his hesitation. He didn't care. He drove himself, pushing the sedan through the city gridlock until he reached the gallery. He found her standing before a massive, abstract canvas of deep crimsons and blacks. You're losing everything, Amara said without turning around. She had heard his footsteps. She knew the rhythm of his soul better than he did. My sources say the Chois are already talking to your rivals. By tomorrow, your name won't be worth the ink on that contract. I don't care about the name, Jun-suk said, standing behind her, his reflection caught in the gallery glass. For the first time, he wasn't a boss or a predator. He was just a man looking for a way back to the only thing that had ever been real. I left you with nothing once, Amara. Now I'm the one with nothing left to lose. The betrayal moved faster than the city traffic. By the time Jun-suk reached the darkened parking garage beneath the gallery, the air was already thick with the scent of ozone and burnt rubber. He knew the signs of an amateur hit: the screeching tires, the erratic positioning of the black SUVs. His rivals, emboldened by his broken contract with the Chois, had moved to strike him where they thought he was softest. They wanted his leverage. They wanted Amara. Jun-suk vaulted over the hood of a parked car, a sleek Beretta appearing in his hand as if by magic. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a desperate, terrifying fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He had left her unprotected once. He wouldn't let the world take her again. Amara! He shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. He rounded the corner, prepared to throw himself into a hail of gunfire to shield her. He expected to find her huddled behind a tire, trembling, the victim he had once perceived her to be. Instead, he skidded to a halt. The garage was silent, save for the ticking of a cooling engine. 2 men lay on the pavement, groaning and clutching shattered kneecaps. A third was slumped against a pillar, his weapon kicked several feet away. In the center of the debris stood Amara. She wasn't shaking. Her cream-colored coat was still perfectly buttoned, though a smudge of grease marred the hem. She held a compact, high-end pistol, with a grip that suggested thousands of hours on a firing range. Her stance was wide, her breathing rhythmic, and her eyes were as cold as the diamonds she sold. Her own security detail, 4 men in gray suits who moved with the lethal efficiency of ghosts, emerged from the shadows, systematically disarming the remaining attackers. "You're late, Jun-suk," she said, her voice steady enough to stop a heart. She didn't lower the weapon until she had cleared the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist. Jun-suk stared at her, his own gun feeling suddenly heavy and useless. "I came to save you." Amara tucked the pistol into a concealed holster beneath her blazer and smoothed her hair. She looked at the would-be kidnappers with the same boredom she might show a defective gemstone. "I told you at the gala," she said, stepping over a fallen body to face him. "I don't live in your world anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to survive it. I stopped waiting for a savior the day you signed those papers." She walked toward her own armored vehicle, her heels clicking a sharp, victorious rhythm. "You didn't come to save me, Jun-suk. You came because you needed to see if I still needed you. I hope you have your answer." The sirens of the city wailed in the distance, but the garage remained a tomb of cold concrete and shattered expectations. Jun-suk stood amidst the wreckage of his ego, his shadow stretching long and jagged under the flickering fluorescent lights. He watched Amara's security team zip-tie the men who had tried to take her, realizing with a sickening clarity that she had never been in danger. He was the only one reeling. "Wait!" he called out as she reached for her car door. The command in his voice was gone, replaced by a raw, hollow desperation. Amara paused, her hand on the handle. She didn't turn around immediately, and for a second, the silence was so heavy he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. When she finally looked back, her expression wasn't one of triumph. It was something far more devastating. A quiet, exhausted clarity. "I spent 5 years looking over my shoulder," Jun-suk confessed, the words spilling out like a penance. "I waited for the lawsuits. I waited for the scandals. I waited for you to hire someone to put a bullet in my head or burn my warehouses to the ground. I gave you every reason to want me dead, Amara. I took your life and tore it to pieces." He took a step toward her, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of the fire he remembered. "You had the money. You had the power. You could have dismantled me a dozen times over the last 2 years. Why didn't you? Why didn't you come back for revenge?" Amara looked at him then, really looked at him, as if she were inspecting a flawed specimen under a jeweler's loupe. A small, sad smile touched the corners of her mouth, not a smile of malice, but one of profound realization. "Revenge is for people who are still defined by what they lost," she said softly. Her voice lacked the heat of anger. It was as cool as the diamonds she traded. "To seek revenge, I would have had to keep you at the center of my world. I would have had to wake up every morning thinking about your name, your face, and the hurt you caused." She stepped closer, her heels clicking a final, definitive beat on the pavement. "I had a choice, Jun-suk. I could spend my life trying to break a man who was already empty, or I could spend it building a woman who was whole. I chose myself." She reached out, adjusting his lapel, with a touch that was clinical and devoid of affection. "You asked why I didn't come for you? The truth is simpler than you want it to be. You weren't worth the time." She turned and entered the car. As the door closed with a heavy, pressurized thud, Jun-suk realized the finality of her words. He had left her with nothing, but in doing so, he had become the nothingness in her life. The sun rose over Seoul in a haze of gold and industrial gray, but the light felt different to Jun-suk as he stood in the center of the Park family boardroom. On the table lay his phone, buzzing incessantly, with frantic reports of territory losses, broken alliances, and the Choi family's declarations of war. Across from him, the elders sat in grim silence, their eyes burning with a demand for blood and retaliation. "The Chois have seized the northern docks," the eldest wheezed, sliding a tactical map toward him. "You must authorize a strike by noon, or we lose our seat at the high table. What is your order?" Jun-suk looked at the map, then at his own hands. He saw the ink on his skin, the sharp, symbolic marks of a cage he had spent his entire life reinforcing. He thought of Amara, standing in that garage, a woman who had found the courage to be nobody until she became everything. She was free because she had let go of the very things he was currently suffocating to hold on to. "My order," Jun-suk said, his voice surprisingly light, "is to burn the contracts." The room went deathly still. "Excuse me?" "I am abdicating," he said, standing up and unbuttoning the heavy suit jacket that had always felt like armor. "The assets, the alliances, the blood-soaked chair, it's yours. Or it's the Choi's. I no longer care." He walked out of the room, ignoring the shouts of "traitor" and the sudden, frantic scrambling of men who didn't know how to lead themselves. As he stepped out of the skyscraper and onto the bustling street, he didn't call for a driver. He simply walked, disappearing into the crowd like a drop of ink in the ocean. For the first time in 30 years, his shadow belonged only to him. He had nothing left, but as the cool morning air hit his face, he realized that for the first time, he was not a ghost. A year later, a massive digital billboard in the heart of the city flickered to life. It displayed a minimalist, stunning image of the blue heart diamond, held in a hand that was dark, elegant, and steady. Above it, the text read, "Cole & Co. True strength is never given." Amara Cole stood at the window of her new penthouse, her reflection a silhouette of absolute composure. She didn't look back at the city she had conquered, nor did she wonder about the man who had once tried to erase her. She simply adjusted her cuff, checked the time on a watch that was hers alone, and stepped into the light of her next meeting. She had outgrown the story he had written for her, and in doing so, she had become the only true sovereign in a world of pretenders.